Before there were words, there was silence. Before there was silence, there was the earth, dark and still, waiting beneath the weight of winter. This is where we begin, not with thunder or proclamation, but with the breath before speech. The moment before the ritual begins, when the temple is empty and the oil lamps flicker against stone walls worn smooth by 10,000 prayers. Listen, there is a land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, flowing like veins through the body of the world. Between them, the earth is black and fertile. Between them, cities rise with mud brick and cedar wood. Between them, humanity plants barley and wheat, raises children, buries the dead, and watches the sky turn from season to season with the patient attention of those who know that time is both endless and precious. This is Sumer. This is the first garden. This is where the gods walked close enough to touch. And in the turning of the year, there comes a moment when the light begins to fail, not suddenly, but gradually, the way a flame gutters when the oil runs low. The days shorten, the air grows cold, the green things withdraw into the earth, pulling their life force down into roots and darkness, waiting for a spring that feels, in the depths of winter, like it may never come. This is the season of descent. This is the season when we tell the oldest story we know, a story about a goddess who had everything and chose to walk down into nothing. A story about stripping away, a story about stillness, a story about the terrible cost of return. Her name is Inanna. She is called by many titles: Queen of Heaven, Queen of Earth, Lady of the Morning and Evening Star, Goddess of Love, of Fertility, of War, of the Storehouse, of Rain, of Thunder, of Desire in all its forms. She is the Goddess of Contradictions, the deity who holds opposites in her hands like offerings and refuses to choose between them. But tonight we do not speak of her triumph. We do not tell the stories of her victories, her lovers, her temples filled with sweet-smelling cedar smoke, and the songs of her priestesses. Tonight, we tell the story of what she gave up, what she lost, what she learned in the deepest darkness, where even gods can die. Tonight, we descend with her. The story begins not with action, but with presence. Close your eyes if you wish. Feel the weight of your body against the earth. Feel the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, in and out, like the tide, like the seasons, like the eternal cycle that no one, not even the gods, can escape. Inanna stands at the beginning of our story, and she is restless.
To understand why Inanna descended, you must first understand what she possessed. Not in the way of counting treasures or measuring grain, but in the way of knowing what it means to hold dominion over the forces that shape human life. Inanna was the goddess of love, not the gentle, nurturing love of a mother, but the fierce, consuming love that draws bodies together in the darkness. The love that makes young men forget their duty and young women abandon their families. The love that is both creative and destructive, that plants seeds and burns fields with equal passion. She was desire embodied, the goddess who understood that longing is what makes us mortal, what separates us from stone and water and the unchanging stars. She was also the goddess of fertility. In her temples, sacred prostitutes welcomed strangers, and in that union, the power of creation flowed through human flesh. The crops grew tall because she willed it. The ewes bore twins because she blessed them. The date palms hung heavy with fruit because she walked between them in the heat of summer, trailing abundance in her wake like perfume. But Inanna was not content to be only soft, only nurturing, only the bringer of pleasure and plenty. She was also the goddess of war. She wore armor of lapis lazuli and gold. She carried weapons that gleamed in the sun. When she rode out to battle, the earth shook beneath her chariot wheels, and her war cry could shatter the courage of the strongest warriors. Kings made offerings to her before they marched to war, begging for her favor, knowing that victory belonged to whomever Inanna chose to smile upon. She was paradox. She was the maiden and the warrior, the lover and the destroyer, the giver of life and the dealer of death. And she was not satisfied. Think on this for a moment. Here was a goddess who possessed every form of power that humans dream of. Beauty that could move mountains, desire that could topple kingdoms, strength that could break armies, abundance that could feed nations. What more could she want? But wholeness is not the same as depth. Inanna looked out from her temple in Uruk, the great city that loved her above all other gods, and she felt the hollowness at the center of her completeness. She knew the surface of things. She knew passion and power, triumph and pleasure. But there was a realm she had never entered, a place she had never seen, a darkness she had never touched. The Underworld, the realm of her sister, Ereshkigal.
If Inanna was light, then Ereshkigal was shadow. If Inanna was the heights of heaven, then Ereshkigal was the depths of earth. If Inanna was motion and change and the constant flux of desire, then Ereshkigal was stillness and permanence and the absolute finality of death. The Underworld was called many things: the land of no return, the house of dust, the place where the dead sit in darkness and eat clay. It was not a place of punishment, as later peoples would imagine hell. It was simply the destination of all who died, rich and poor, slave and king, warrior and child, all descended into the darkness when their breath ceased. All became shades, stripped of their earthly identities, dwelling in a vast silence beneath the roots of the world. And Ereshkigal ruled there alone. She had not chosen this realm. The gods had cast lots, dividing the cosmos among themselves, and the underworld had fallen to her. She descended, and the gates closed behind her, and she sat upon her throne in the darkness and governed the dead with absolute, unyielding law. She had known love once. Her husband was Gugalana, the bull of heaven, a creature of terrible power and beauty, but he had died, slain by the hero Gilgamesh in a fit of mortal pride and rage. Gugalana's death had been violent and meaningless, and Ereshkigal had received his shade into her realm, had held what remained of him in her arms, and had discovered that even gods can know grief. Since then, she had sat alone, unmoved and unmoving, neither living nor dead, but something between, a goddess of absence, of everything that is lost and cannot be recovered. And Inanna, in her bright palace under the sun, felt the pull of that darkness. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the desire to know what her sister knew, to touch the mystery that even gods feared. Perhaps it was the recognition that she could not truly call herself whole if there was any realm of existence she refused to enter. Or perhaps it was simpler than that.
Perhaps Inanna understood, in the way that only a goddess of contradictions could understand, that descent was necessary, that light without darkness is incomplete, that life without death is a lie, that to truly know power, one must first know powerlessness. Whatever the reason, Inanna made her decision. She would descend to the underworld.
When Inanna announced her intention, the heavens grew quiet. The other gods did not protest loudly. Gods know better than to argue with Inanna when her mind is set. But their silence carried a weight of disapproval and fear. No one descended to the underworld willingly. No one entered the realm of the dead while still drawing breath. The very idea violated the order of things, the careful boundaries that kept the cosmos balanced and stable. But Inanna was not concerned with propriety. She was concerned with necessity. She began her preparations with the methodical care of a priestess preparing for the most sacred of rituals. This was not an impulsive journey, not a reckless adventure. Every step was deliberate. Every choice was made with full knowledge of its weight. First, she gathered her divine regalia, the 7 divine May, the attributes and powers that marked her as queen of heaven and earth. Each piece was precious beyond measure, each one a symbol of her authority and identity. She put on her crown, the shigura, which sat upon her head like the weight of heaven itself. She hung the small lapis beads around her neck, stones the color of the night sky, each one holding a fragment of celestial power. She fastened the breastplate across her chest, armor that had turned aside weapons and arrows, that had protected her heart in 1,000 battles. She placed the gold rings upon her fingers and the gold bracelet upon her wrist, symbols of her ability to shape the world, to influence and command. She clasped the measuring rod and line in her hand, the tools of justice and order, the instruments by which she judged truth from falsehood, right action from wrong. And finally, she wrapped herself in her royal robe, the pala, woven from threads of starlight and divinity, the garment that marked her as sovereign, as queen, as goddess. When she was dressed, she looked like what she was, the most powerful deity in the visible world, magnificent, untouchable, complete. But she knew she would not remain so. Before she left, Inanna went to her faithful servant, Ninshubur, who had been her companion and vizier for uncounted years. Ninshubur was more than a servant. She was witness, protector, the keeper of Inanna's word when Inanna herself could not speak. "I'm going down into the underworld," Inanna said. Her voice was steady, without doubt or fear. "I am going to attend the funeral rites of Gugalana, my sister's husband. I am going to pay my respects to the dead." This was the reason she would give at the gates, the justification that made her journey acceptable within the laws of divine propriety. But both goddesses knew it was not the whole truth. "If I do not return," Inanna continued, "you must mourn for me. Beat the drum in the assembly places, circle the temples of the gods, tear your clothes and rake your skin. Go to the temples of the high gods and beg them to bring me back. Go first to Enlil in Nippur. If he will not help you, go to Nana in Ur. If he refuses you, go finally to Enki in Eridu. One of them will answer, one of them will act." Ninshubur knelt and pressed her forehead to the ground. "I will do as you command, my queen. I will wait for you. I will call for you. I will bring you home." Inanna touched the top of her servant's head gently, a gesture of blessing and farewell. Then she turned toward the east, toward the place where the earth opens into darkness, and began to walk. The journey to the underworld is not measured in distance, but in transformation. There are no roads that lead there, no maps that mark the way. The descent is an act of will, a deliberate turning away from the light, a choice to move against every instinct that says to stay in the warmth and safety of the living world. Inanna walked through her city of Uruk, past the temples where her priestesses sang her praises, past the markets where merchants blessed her name, past the fields where farmers prayed for her favor. She walked through the gates of the city, out into the wilderness where the rivers ran dark and slow. She walked until the air grew cold, until the sunlight seemed to weaken and fade, even though the sun still hung in the sky. She walked until she felt the world shift around her, until the living lands gave way to the threshold places, the liminal spaces where the boundary between life and death grows thin. And then ahead of her, she saw it, the first gate of the Underworld. A massive door of bronze and cedar wood set into the side of a mountain that seemed to have no summit, that rose up and up into darkness until it became impossible to tell where stone ended and shadow began. Inanna stood before the gate and felt, perhaps for the first time in her eternal existence, the faint stirring of something that might have been fear. But she did not turn back. She lifted her hand and struck the gate 3 times, and the sound echoed through the earth like thunder in a distant storm. From within, a voice called out, "Who are you who strikes the gate of the land of no return?" Inanna drew herself up, standing in the fullness of her power and glory. "I am Inanna, Queen of Heaven. I have come to attend the funeral rites of Gugalana, the Bull of Heaven, husband of my sister Ereshkigal. Open the gate and let me enter." There was a long silence. Then the voice spoke again, and this time it was closer, on the other side of the door. "Wait here," said Nettie, the chief gatekeeper of the Underworld. "I must go and tell my queen that you have come." And so Inanna waited, standing alone in the cold, in the silence, at the threshold of the dark. The first act of descent is always the same. It is the decision to go, the commitment to step forward, the acceptance that once you cross certain thresholds, you cannot return unchanged. Inanna had made her choice. Now she would discover what it would cost her. While Inanna waited at the gate, let us consider what she carried with her, not as mere ornament or decoration, but as power made manifest. Each piece of her divine regalia was a may, a fundamental principle of civilization and cosmic order. The mays were not simply symbols, they were reality itself, concentrated and contained. To wear them was to embody them. The crown, the shugura, sat upon Inanna's head. It was fashioned of gold and horn, rising in tiers like a ziggurat reaching toward heaven. When she wore it, she held dominion over the high places. She was authority. She was sovereignty. She was the power to rule, to command, to expect obedience from both mortals and gods. The crown made her queen, and without it, she was merely a woman, merely a voice among many voices. Consider the weight of that. Not physical weight, though the crown was heavy enough, but the weight of responsibility, of expectation, of being the one to whom all others look for judgment and decision. Every eye upon you, every mistake magnified, every choice reverberating through the lives of thousands. Inanna wore this weight as easily as breathing, but it was weight nonetheless. The lapis beads that hung around her neck were small, each one no larger than a grain of barley, but their color held the depth of the night sky. Lapis lazuli, brought from distant mountains, ground and polished until it gleamed like captured starlight. These beads were beauty, were adornment, with a power to be desired and admired. They said, "I am worth looking at, I am worth wanting, my presence is a gift to those who behold me." Vanity, some might call it, but it was more than vanity. It was the understanding that beauty is a form of power, that to be desired is to have influence, that the ability to draw eyes and hearts is its own kind of sovereignty. The breastplate that covered her chest was made of beaten gold, worked by the finest craftsmen in Sumer, etched with patterns of lions and stars. It protected her heart, her vital center, the seat of her courage and her passion. With this armor, she could face any enemy without flinching. She could walk into battle without fear. She could stand firm when others would flee. It was protection, yes, but it was also isolation, a barrier between her heart and the world, a way of saying, "You cannot hurt me, you cannot reach me, I am invulnerable." The gold ring on her finger and the bracelet on her wrist were fashioned in the shape of serpents, their bodies coiled in eternal circles, their eyes set with tiny garnets that glowed like embers. These were the symbols of her power to influence and shape, to bend the world to her will. With a gesture, she could make things happen. With a word, she could change minds, alter destinies, redirect the flow of events. These were the tools of a goddess who was accustomed to getting her way. The measuring rod and line she carried in her left hand were made of cedar wood and flax, simple materials for such profound implements. But with these tools, Inanna could measure truth against falsehood, justice against injustice. She could establish boundaries, set limits, determine what was proper and what was transgression. She was law, she was order, she was the one who decided what was fair. To hold the measuring rod was to hold the power of judgment itself. And finally, the royal robe, the palla, draped around her body in folds of crimson and purple, dyed with the most expensive pigments in the world. The purple from thousands of crushed sea snails, the crimson from the bodies of insects that lived only on certain desert plants. These robes were identity. They announced to everyone who saw her, "I am Inanna, I am queen, I am goddess, I am myself and no other." Without it, who would she be? These 7 items were not mere possessions, they were extensions of Inanna's very being. To remove them would be like removing pieces of herself. To surrender them would be to surrender everything she understood herself to be. And she knew, standing at that gate, that she would lose them all.
Neti, the chief gatekeeper, stood before Ereshkigal's throne in the great hall of the dead. He was a strange figure, neither fully living nor fully dead, bound to his duty for all eternity. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his body wrapped in robes the color of ash. He had stood at the gates of the underworld for so long that he had forgotten if he had ever lived under the sun, ever felt warmth, ever known anything but the cold, still air of the land of no return. "My queen," he said, bowing low, "there is someone at the outer gate." Ereshkigal sat upon her throne of black stone, unmoving as a statue. She had not moved in days, perhaps weeks. Time had no meaning in the underworld. She was dressed in robes of mourning, her hair unbound and tangled, her face gaunt with grief that had no end. "Who would come to the gates of the dead?" she asked. Her voice was hollow, empty of emotion. "She says she is Inanna, Queen of Heaven," Neti replied. "She says she has come to attend the funeral rites of Gugalana, your husband." For the first time in uncounted days, Ereshkigal moved.
Her head turned slowly, her eyes focusing on the gatekeeper with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Inanna," she whispered, "my sister." The word carried no warmth, no joy, only recognition, cold and final as stone. Ereshkigal was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then she spoke, and her voice was sharp as broken glass. "Bolt the 7 gates," she commanded. "Then open each gate a crack, but no more than a crack. Let her enter the first gate, and as she passes through each gate, according to the ancient laws, remove one of her royal garments and divine powers. Let her be brought before me, naked and bowed low." Neti bowed again. "It will be done, my queen." He returned to the outer gate, where Inanna still waited in the cold and silence. When he drew back the great bronze bolt and opened the door, just a crack, just enough for a single person to squeeze through, Inanna saw not the grand entrance she had expected, but only a narrow opening, barely wide enough for her shoulders. "Enter," Neti said, "but know that you enter under the laws of the Underworld. All who come here must come on the Underworld's terms." Inanna straightened her shoulders and prepared to step through, but Neti held up one hand, stopping her. "The ancient laws decree that none may enter the Underworld, adorned as they are in the world above. You must remove your crown." Inanna's hand went to her head, touching the shugura, the great horned crown that marked her as Queen of Heaven. "Why?" she asked. "Why must I remove it?" "The ways of the Underworld are perfect," Neti replied. "They may not be questioned." And so Inanna reached up and lifted the crown from her head. For the first time in eternities, her hair fell loose around her shoulders, unbound, unconstrained. She felt suddenly smaller, as if she had lost several inches of height. The weight she had carried for so long was gone, and its absence made her feel strangely unbalanced, as if she might topple over. She handed the crown to Neti, who took it without ceremony and set it aside. "Enter," Neti said again, and Inanna, no longer crowned, stepped through the first gate into the darkness beyond. What happens in the space between gates is difficult to describe because it is a space without qualities. There is no light, but neither is there complete darkness. Just a gray, uniform emptiness that seems to stretch in all directions. There is no sound except the whisper of Inanna's own breathing and the soft fall of her footsteps on ground that might be stone or might be packed earth or might be nothing at all. Time behaves strangely here. Inanna walks for what feels like hours, but it might be only moments. Or it might be days. There is no way to tell. No sun rises or sets. No shadows lengthen or shorten. There is only the walking and the silence, and the growing sense that she has already been here forever and will never leave. This is the first lesson of descent, the loss of reference points. In the world above, Inanna always knew where she stood. She was queen, she was goddess, she was beloved and feared and worshipped. Every temple, every prayer, every offering, every hymn sung in her honor, all of these were mirrors reflecting her identity back to her, confirming that she existed, that she mattered, that she was real. Here, there are no mirrors. There is no one to see her but herself, and in the uniform grayness, even that becomes difficult. She walks and she waits, and she begins to understand that patience is not optional in this place. The underworld will not be hurried. The underworld does not care about her schedule, her importance, her divine prerogatives. The underworld simply is, and she must move through it at the pace it allows. After what might be an hour or might be an age, she sees ahead of her another gate, identical to the first, another door of bronze and cedar, another threshold to cross. And standing before it, Neti, waiting as if he had never moved, as if he had always been standing there and would always be standing there, eternal as the darkness itself. "You wish to pass the second gate?" he says. It is not a question. "I do," Inanna replies. "Then you must remove the small lapis beads from around your neck." Inanna's hand goes to the beads, feeling their smoothness, their coolness against her skin. She has worn these beads for so long that they feel like part of her body. "Why?" she asks, though she knows already that the answer will be the same. "The ways of the underworld are perfect," Neti says. "They may not be questioned." And so Inanna reaches behind her neck and unclasps the necklace. The beads slide through her fingers like water, like stars falling from the sky. She hands them to Neti, and he takes them and sets them beside the crown. Without them, her neck feels exposed, vulnerable. The beads had been armor of a kind, had been a statement of her beauty and worth. Without them, she is just a woman with bare skin, no different from any mortal woman who ever lived and died. "Enter," Neti says, and Inanna passes through the second gate. Let us return to the crown for a moment and consider more deeply what its removal meant. A crown is not simply an object, it is a statement. It says, "I have authority. I have the right to rule. My word is law. My judgment is final. When I speak, others listen, and when I command, others obey." To wear a crown is to bear the weight of everyone's expectations, everyone's needs, everyone's demands. It is to be the one who makes the difficult decisions, who carries the responsibility for success and failure, who cannot afford to show weakness or doubt because others are watching, always watching, measuring your worthiness to wear that crown. Inanna had worn her crown for so long that she could not remember a time without it. She had been born a goddess, born to rule, and the crown had been placed upon her head in the first moments of her consciousness. She had never questioned whether she deserved it, never wondered if she was worthy of it. It simply was, as natural and inevitable as breathing. Until the moment Neti asked her to remove it. In that moment, standing at the first gate, Inanna felt something she had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. Without the crown, who was she? What gave her the right to be here, to make this journey, to demand entrance to the underworld? She was no different from any other being who had ever died and descended into darkness. She was no more special, no more deserving of consideration. But she removed the crown anyway, because the alternative was to turn back, and turning back was not an option she could accept. As she walked through the gray space beyond the first gate, she felt the absence of the crown like a phantom limb. Her head felt too light, her neck bent too easily. She wanted to reach up and touch the place where it had been, to confirm that it was truly gone, but she resisted the urge. This was the first stripping, the first loss. Authority removed, sovereignty surrendered. And in its absence, the first whisper of a question: if I am not a queen, what am I? The second gate rose before her out of the grayness, like a ship emerging from fog. Same bronze, same cedar, same narrow opening barely wide enough to pass through. Neti stood waiting, patient as stone. "You wish to pass the second gate?" he said. I do. Then you must remove the small lapis beads from around your neck. Inanna's fingers went to the necklace, feeling each small bead, each perfect sphere of deep blue stone. These beads had been a gift from the moon god Nana, her father, given to her when she first took up residence in Uruk. They were not just beautiful, they were a reminder that she was beloved, that she was cherished, that she was worth adorning with precious things. Beauty is a strange kind of power. It draws eyes and hearts without effort, without force. People want to be near beautiful things, to touch them, to possess them. Beauty opens doors that strength alone cannot open. Beauty makes others want to please you, to give you gifts, to earn your favor. Inanna had never questioned her beauty. It was simply true, as evident as the sun in the sky. She had seen her own reflection in polished bronze mirrors, had seen the way men and women alike looked at her with longing and desire. Her beauty was a fact, as real and solid as the earth beneath her feet. But beauty, she was beginning to understand, was also a burden. It required maintenance. It required constant attention to appearance, to adornment, to presentation. It meant being always on display, always aware of how others were perceiving you, always conscious of your own image. And it meant that others never saw past the surface. They saw the beauty and they wanted it, but they did not see her. They did not see the mind behind the lovely face, the heart beneath the perfect skin. They saw what they wanted to see, and what they wanted was beauty, nothing more. She unclasped the necklace and let it pool in her palm like liquid starlight. For a moment, she was tempted to put it back on, to refuse this sacrifice. But she did not. She handed the beads to Neti, and he took them and set them beside the crown, and Inanna felt their absence like a sudden coldness against her throat. Without adornment, she was just a face, just a body, not special, not extraordinary, just another woman walking through darkness. She passed through the second gate, and the grayness swallowed her again. Wait, I must correct myself. The lapis beads were removed at the second gate. At the third gate, Inanna was asked to remove her double-strand necklace of carnelian and lapis, a different piece, heavier, more ornate. Let me begin again. The third gate appeared before her as the others had, seemingly conjured from nothing. Or perhaps she had been walking toward it all along and had only just now noticed it. Neti stood in his place, unchanging. You wish to pass the third gate? I do. Then you must remove the double-strand necklace from around your neck. This necklace was different from the first. Where the lapis beads had been delicate, almost ethereal, this necklace was substantial, powerful. Strands of deep red carnelian alternating with lapis lazuli, each stone perfectly matched, perfectly cut. It sat heavy around her neck, resting against her collarbones. This necklace represented something different from mere beauty. It represented desire itself. The desire she inspired in others, and her own desire, the fire that burned at the center of her being. Inanna was the goddess of love, of sexual union, of the fierce need that draws bodies together in the darkness. She understood desire in all its forms, the tender and the violent, the sweet and the bitter, the desire that creates life and the desire that destroys it. Desire was her domain, her power, her gift to humanity. In the temples dedicated to her, priestesses welcomed strangers into their beds, and in that union, the sacred and the profane became one. Through desire, humans touched the divine. Through desire, new life entered the world. But desire is also need. Desire is vulnerability. Desire is admitting that you want something outside yourself, that you are not complete alone, that you require another to feel whole. Inanna had never thought of desire as weakness before. She had always experienced it as power, the power to make others want her, the power to take what she wanted, the power to consume and be consumed without losing herself in the process. But here, at the third gate, being asked to remove the symbol of that desire, she began to understand its other face. Desire chains you to the world. Desire keeps you reaching, grasping, never satisfied. Desire makes you dependent on external things for your sense of completion. She reached up and unfastened the necklace, feeling the weight of it slide through her fingers. The stones clinked softly against each other, a sound like distant bells. Without it, her throat felt bare, exposed. She could feel her own pulse beating in her neck, vulnerable, visible. She gave the necklace to Nettie, and he added it to the growing pile of her discarded power. She passed through the third gate, and the emptiness beyond seemed somehow larger, more vast, as if with each gate she was entering a space more empty than the last.
The fourth gate came upon her more quickly than the others, or perhaps she had simply stopped noticing the time between gates. It was becoming difficult to remember what she had been thinking moments before, difficult to hold on to thoughts that seemed to slip away like water through her fingers. Nettie was waiting. "You wish to pass the fourth gate?" "I do." "Then you must remove the breastplate from your chest." Inanna's hands went to the fastenings at her sides, to the leather straps that held the golden breastplate in place. Her fingers fumbled with the buckles. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were shaking slightly. The breastplate was protection, it was courage, it was the ability to face danger without flinching, to stand firm when others fled. Inanna had worn this armor into battle countless times. She had felt arrows glance off it, had felt sword blows strike it and slide away harmlessly. She had walked through fire and blood and chaos, and the breastplate had kept her safe, had kept her heart beating strong and sure beneath its golden surface. But the breastplate was also a wall, a barrier between herself and the world. It said, "You cannot hurt me. You cannot touch my heart. I am invulnerable." And in saying that, it also said, "I am alone. I am separate. I am armored not just against attack, but against connection." To remove the breastplate was to admit that she could be wounded, that her heart was soft and vulnerable, that she was not, after all, invincible. She unfastened the last buckle and lifted the breastplate away from her body. The air felt suddenly cold against her chest. She could feel her own heartbeat, fast and irregular, no longer hidden behind metal and myth. She was afraid. The realization came suddenly, undeniably. She, Inanna, Queen of Heaven, Goddess of Love and War, was afraid. She handed the breastplate to Nettie, and his gray hands took it without comment, without sympathy.
He had seen countless souls pass through these gates. Her fear was nothing new, nothing special. "Enter," he said, and Inanna, her heart exposed, walked through the fourth gate into deeper darkness.
At the fifth gate, Neti asked for her golden ring. Actually, there were several rings, one on each hand, made of twisted gold wire, fashioned to look like serpents devouring their own tails. Ouroboros, the eternal circle, the symbol of power that renews itself endlessly. These rings were her ability to act upon the world, to shape and influence and change. With a gesture of her ringed fingers, she could command, she could direct, she could make things happen. This is perhaps the subtlest power of all, the power to have agency, to be an actor rather than one acted upon, the power to say, "I want this," and have the world shift to accommodate that want, the power to initiate, to begin, to cause. Inanna had never been helpless. Even in her earliest memories, she had been able to affect her surroundings, to bend circumstances to her will. She had never known what it was like to want something and not be able to pursue it, to see a need and not be able to address it, to be powerless in the face of events. She pulled the rings from her fingers, one by one. They came off easily, too easily, as if they had never truly belonged to her at all, as if she had only been borrowing them. Her hands looked strange without them, bare, ordinary, just hands, no different from any mortal woman's hands. She gave the rings to Neti. Without them, she found she could not quite remember what she had intended to do when she reached the Underworld. Had there been a plan, a purpose beyond simply arriving? She could not recall. The goal, if there had ever been one, seemed distant now, unimportant. She was no longer shaping events. Events were shaping her. She passed through the fifth gate and did not look back. At the sixth gate, Neti asked for the measuring rod and line. Inanna had been carrying these in her left hand, gripping them so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She had not consciously realized she was holding them until the moment Neti asked for them. The measuring rod was justice, order, the ability to determine what was right and what was wrong, what was fair and what was transgression. To hold the measuring rod was to be the judge, to be the one who decided, to have the authority to say this is good or this is evil and have that judgment stand. Inanna had always trusted her own judgment. She had always known with absolute certainty when something was right or wrong. She had never doubted her moral compass, never questioned her own sense of justice. But now, standing at the sixth gate, stripped of her crown and her beauty and her desire and her courage and her agency, she found herself questioning everything. What right did she have to judge others when she herself was being judged? What made her measurements any more true than someone else's? What if she had been wrong all along and had simply never realized it because she had the power to make others accept her version of truth? The measuring rod felt heavy in her hand, heavier than it had ever felt before. Not because of its physical weight, but because of all the judgments she had ever made, all the people she had found wanting, all the times she had measured and found something lacking. She held it out to Neti, and he took it. Without it, she felt unmoored. How was she supposed to know what was true anymore? How was she supposed to distinguish right from wrong? What reference point could she use? There was no answer. There was only the sixth gate, standing open, leading into darkness deeper than any she had yet encountered.
She entered, and the darkness closed around her like water.
The seventh gate was the last, and Nettie stood before it with the final demand. You must remove the royal robe. This was the palla, the garment that proclaimed her identity to all who saw her. The robe dyed with rare and precious pigments, woven with threads that caught the light like flames. The robe that said, I am Inanna, I am goddess, I am queen. This was identity itself. This was the last thread connecting her to who she had been when she began this journey. Inanna's hands trembled as she reached for the clasp at her shoulder. The robe had been wrapped around her body in elaborate folds, held in place with golden pins. She removed each pin slowly, carefully, as if by moving slowly she could delay the inevitable. But there was no delaying. There was only the choice: remove the robe and continue forward, or refuse and turn back. She had come too far to turn back now. She unwound the robe from her body fold by fold until she stood in only the simple shift that she wore beneath it. And then Nettie shook his head. All of it, he said quietly. The ways of the underworld are perfect. None may enter clothed. And so Inanna removed even the shift, pulling it over her head and standing finally, completely naked before the gate. She was no longer queen of heaven. She was no longer goddess of love or war. She was no longer beautiful or desirable or powerful or just or even herself. She was simply a being, nameless and bare, standing at the final gate. She handed the robe and the shift to Nettie, and he took them and added them to the pile of everything she had once been. Enter, he said. And Inanna, naked as the day she was born, naked as every human who ever entered the world or left it, walked through the seventh gate into the throne room of the dead. The throne room of the underworld was not what Inanna had expected. She had imagined, perhaps, something grand and terrible, a vast hall filled with columns of bone, walls carved with images of torment, a ceiling lost in shadow. She had imagined drama, spectacle, the theatrical staging of death's dominion. But the throne room was simply empty. It was a large space, certainly. The walls were made of dark stone, unadorned. The ceiling was lost in darkness overhead, and the floor was smooth and cold beneath her bare feet. There were no decorations, no hangings, no symbols of power, just stone and shadow and silence. And in the center of the room, sitting on a simple throne of black stone, was Ereshkigal. Inanna's sister looked like her, and nothing like her. They shared the same features, the same high cheekbones, the same full mouth, the same dark eyes. But where Inanna had always been light and motion and vibrancy, Ereshkigal was stillness itself. She sat absolutely motionless on her throne, her hands resting on the armrests, her face turned toward the center of the room as if watching something that wasn't there. Her hair hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. Her robe was colorless, the gray of ash, of dust, of everything from which color had long since faded. She was not dead, but she was not truly alive either. She was something in between, a goddess who had sat so long in stillness that she had become stillness, who had dwelt so long in death that death had seeped into her bones and replaced her blood with silence. When Inanna entered, Ereshkigal's eyes moved, just slightly, just enough to focus on her sister's naked form. For a long moment, neither goddess spoke. Then Ereshkigal tilted her head slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or might have been simple observation. "Sister,"
she said. Her voice was hollow, empty as a reed, empty as wind through abandoned rooms. "Sister," Inanna replied. There was no warmth in the exchange, no joy at reunion, only recognition, cold and final. Around the throne room, standing in the shadows, were the 7 Inanna, the judges of the Underworld. They were ancient gods, older even than Inanna and Ereshkigal. Gods who had existed before the current order of things, before the division of heaven and earth and underworld. They had no names that anyone remembered. They had no individual faces. They were simply presence, simply judgment, simply the accumulated weight of all the deaths that had ever been. They turned their attention to Inanna, and she felt the weight of their gaze like physical pressure against her skin. "You have entered my realm," Ereshkigal said. Her voice held no emotion, no inflection. She stated facts as one might observe the weather or note the passing of time. "I have come to attend the funeral rites of Gugalana," Inanna said. "Your husband, my brother-in-law." "There are no funeral rites," Ereshkigal replied. "The dead do not have funerals in the underworld. They simply are. They sit in silence and eat clay and remember nothing of the light." Inanna said nothing. "You came for another reason," Ereshkigal continued. "Perhaps you do not even know the reason yourself, but you came because you could not bear that there was a realm you had not entered, a power you had not touched, a darkness you had not illuminated with your presence." Still, Inanna said nothing. What could she say? Ereshkigal had spoken the truth, or close enough to truth that denial would be pointless. Ereshkigal leaned forward slightly on her throne. For the first time, there was a hint of something in her voice, not quite anger, not quite pain, but something that might have been either or both. "Do you know what it is like," she asked softly, "to sit alone in darkness for eternity? Do you know what it is like to hold the dead in your arms and feel them fade into nothing while you yourself cannot fade, cannot die, cannot escape? Do you know what it is like to have a sister who walks in sunlight and never thinks of you, who has everything while you have nothing, who is celebrated and loved while you are feared and forgotten?" Inanna wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, wanted to explain, but she found she had no words. What could she say? That she was sorry? That she had thought of Ereshkigal sometimes in passing, the way one might think of a distant relative or a half-remembered dream? It would not be enough. It would never be enough. Ereshkigal straightened again, settling back into her throne, settling back into stillness. "The law of the underworld is simple," she said. "All who enter must be judged, and the judgment is always the same." She lifted one hand and gestured to the 7 Inanna. They moved forward, out of the shadows, forming a semicircle around Inanna. She felt their eyes upon her, felt them looking through her, measuring every action she had ever taken, every choice she had ever made, every moment of pride and cruelty and selfishness. She wanted to defend herself, to argue her case, to explain that she had been a good goddess, had blessed her people, had brought fertility and abundance and joy. But no defense was allowed. The Inanna did not speak. They simply looked, and in their looking, judgment was rendered. Guilty. Of what? Of everything. Of being alive when so many were dead. Of having power when so many were powerless. of walking in light when so many dwelt in darkness, of being while others were not. One of the Inanna spoke a single word. Inanna did not understand the word. It was a language older than language, a sound that existed before sound had meaning, but she understood its effect.
The striking was not dramatic. There was no flash of lightning, no crack of thunder, no spectacular display of divine power. The Inanna spoke, and Inanna felt something inside her break. Not her body, though her body crumpled and fell to the cold stone floor. Not her mind, though her thoughts scattered and dissolved like morning mist. Something deeper than body or mind, something essential, something that had always been and had seemed eternal. Her breath stopped. Her heart ceased its beating. The divine spark that had animated her since the beginning of time flickered and went dark. She was dead. Ereshkigal rose from her throne and walked across the room to where her sister's body lay. She looked down at the corpse with no expression on her face, no triumph, no grief, no satisfaction. She gestured, and 2 attendants came forward, gray, faceless figures who might once have been human or might never have been anything but shadows given form. They lifted Inanna's body and carried it to the wall, where a large hook of black iron protruded from the stone. They hung her body on the hook like a side of meat, like a piece of refuse, like something that had once held value, but now held none. There she hung, naked and dead, empty and still. And Ereshkigal returned to her throne and sat down and did not move again. And the silence of the underworld settled over everything, like dust, like ash, like the weight of all the accumulated years of death. 3 days and 3 nights Inanna hung on the hook, or it might have been 3 weeks, or 3 months, or 3 seconds. Time had no meaning in the underworld. There was only the eternal present, stretching in all directions, endless and unchanging.
Meanwhile, in the world above, things had begun to change. It started subtly, so subtly that at first no one noticed. A young woman looked at her husband and felt nothing. Not love, not desire, not even the comfortable affection of long companionship, just nothing. She turned away from him in their bed, confused and vaguely disturbed, but could not say why. A farmer walked through his fields and saw that the barley, which should have been growing tall and green, had simply stopped. Not died. There was no withering, no yellowing of leaves. It had simply stopped growing, as if it had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. A ewe gave birth to a lamb, and the lamb did not breathe. The ewe looked at it and walked away, unconcerned, as if the lamb had never been hers, as if birth and death were the same thing. In the temple of Inanna in Uruk, the priestesses sang the morning hymns and found that their voices sounded hollow, that the words had lost their meaning. The sacred prostitutes greeted their patrons and felt nothing, no spark of divine connection, no sense of the goddess moving through them. They went through the motions mechanically, feeling like they were play-acting at something they no longer understood. The world continued to turn. The sun rose and set, the rivers flowed, but something essential had gone out of it. The animating force, the thing that made life worth living, the juice and joy and passionate engagement with existence, all of it had drained away like water from a broken vessel.
People went about their daily tasks because they could think of nothing else to do, but their hearts were not in it. They ate without tasting, they spoke without meaning, they moved through the world like ghosts, like shades, like the dead who sit in the underworld and eat clay. And in her temple, Ninshubur waited 3 days and 3 nights for her queen to return. When the dawn of the 4th day came and Inanna had not appeared, Ninshubur knew. She tore her clothes and threw herself to the ground and beat her fists against the earth. She circled the temples of the gods, crying out her grief. She went to the public squares and beat the funeral drum, and the sound echoed through the empty streets like a heartbeat, like a summons, like the last sound at the end of the world. And then, as Inanna had instructed, she went to petition the gods.
Ninshubur was not a goddess, but she was not quite mortal either. She existed in that space between, a being of power and purpose who had devoted her entire existence to serving Inanna, not out of compulsion or fear, but out of love. She had been with Inanna for uncountable years. She had witnessed her queen's victories and defeats, her joys and rages, her moments of transcendent beauty and her moments of casual cruelty. She had seen all of Inanna and loved her anyway, with the fierce, unwavering loyalty of one who has found their purpose and has no desire to seek any other. And now her queen was gone. The grief that tore through Ninshubur was not the polite, contained grief of official mourning. It was wild, animal, raw. She fell to the ground outside Inanna's temple and clawed at her face until blood ran down her cheeks. She pulled at her hair until handfuls came loose in her fists. She screamed until her voice gave out, and she could only make harsh, gasping sounds that were more painful than silence. The priestesses came out of the temple and tried to comfort her, but she pushed them away. "She is gone," Ninshubur said, over and over, as if repetition could make the impossible true. "She descended, and she has not returned. She is gone." The priestesses looked at each other in confusion and growing fear. Gods did not die. Gods did not disappear. Gods were eternal, unchanging, as permanent as the stars. But they could feel it, even if they didn't want to admit it. They could feel the absence in the world, the hollow place where Inanna had been. When Ninshubur could breathe again, when the first wave of grief had passed and left her empty and shaking, she remembered her queen's instructions. She would petition the gods. She would beg them to intervene. She would make them understand that the world could not continue without Inanna, that her absence was not just the loss of one goddess, but the loss of life itself. She stood on trembling legs and set out for Nippur, the city of Enlil, the father of the gods, the lord of the wind, the most powerful deity in the Sumerian pantheon. The temple of Enlil in Nippur was the greatest temple in all of Sumer. Its ziggurat rose 7 stories high, each level painted a different color: black, white, red, blue, yellow, silver, gold, ascending toward heaven like a stairway for the gods. Ninshubur climbed the stairs slowly, her body aching from grief and exhaustion. She had not eaten or slept since Inanna's disappearance. She had only mourned, and now she had only purpose. At the top of the ziggurat, in the temple proper, she prostrated herself before the statue of Enlil and began to speak. "Great Enlil, father of the gods, lord of the wind and the storm, hear my petition. Your daughter Inanna has descended to the underworld and has not returned. The world withers without her. Desire has left the earth. Fertility has ceased. Please, I beg you, intervene. Bring her back." There was a long silence. Then a voice spoke from the air itself, deep and resonant as distant thunder. "My daughter sought the underworld of her own will. She desired to know what her sister knows, to touch what her sister touches. She grasped at the dark places and was swallowed by them. This is natural. This is as it should be. I will not intervene." "But," Ninshubor began. "No," Enlil said, and his voice held a finality that made the temple stones tremble. "The underworld's ways are perfect. They may not be questioned. If Inanna chose to descend, she must face the consequences of that choice. I will not disturb the order of things for her sake." Ninshubor felt despair rising in her throat like bile. But Inanna had anticipated this. Inanna had given her 3 names. She left Nippur and traveled to the city of Nanna, the moon god, father of Inanna. The temple of Nanna was beautiful in a different way than Enlil's, quieter, more intimate. The moon god was known for his gentleness, his kindness, his care for his children. Surely he would help. Ninshubor knelt before his altar and made the same plea. "Great Nanna, father of Inanna, your daughter has descended to the underworld and has not returned. Please, I beg you, bring her back. The world needs her. Your daughter needs you." Again, a silence. Then Nanna's voice, sad but firm. "My daughter has always been headstrong, always seeking what she should not seek, grasping at what she should not touch. She has made her choice. I grieve for her, but I will not interfere with the laws of the underworld. They are ancient and necessary. They are not mine to change." "Please," Ninshubor whispered. "Please." "No," Nanna said gently. "I am sorry." Ninshubor left with tears streaming down her face, but she did not give up. She had one more name, Enki. The god of wisdom, of fresh water, of magic and cunning, the god who dwelt in Eridu, the first city, the oldest temple, the god who was known for his cleverness, for his willingness to bend rules and find solutions where none seemed to exist. If anyone would help, it would be Enki. Enki's temple in Eridu was not grand like Enlil's or beautiful like Nanna's. It was old, so old that parts of it had sunk into the marshy ground and water seeped up between the floor stones. The walls were stained with salt and time. The ceiling was low and oppressive. But there was power here, ancient, patient, deep as the aquifer that ran beneath the world. Ninshubor knelt in the damp temple and made her petition one final time. "Great Enki, Lord of wisdom, Lord of the deep waters, Inanna has descended to the underworld and has not returned. Enlil refuses to help. Nanna refuses to help. You are my last hope. Please, the world is dying without her. Please bring her back." For a long moment there was no response. Then Ninshubor heard a sound, soft, like water dripping, like pages turning, like someone thinking very carefully about a difficult problem. "Tell me," Enki's voice said finally, "what happened to her exactly?" Ninshubor recounted everything she knew, the 7 gates, the stripping of the regalia, the judgment, the death. "Ah," Enki said, "I see."
Another pause. "I cannot bring her back," he said, and Ninshubur's heart broke. "I cannot violate the laws of the underworld. What Enlil and Nana said is true. Those laws are ancient and necessary. If I simply took her from Ereshkigal's realm, the entire cosmic order could collapse." "Then she is lost," Ninshubur whispered. "I said I cannot bring her back," Enki replied. "I did not say she must remain dead." Ninshubur looked up, hope kindling in her chest. "There is a way," Enki continued, "but it is narrow and difficult. Ereshkigal will not release Inanna unless she is given something in return, something she needs more than she needs her revenge against her sister." "What does she need?" Ninshubur asked. "She needs what all who grieve need. She needs to be seen. She needs her pain to be acknowledged. She needs someone to witness her suffering and say, 'I see you. I understand. Your pain matters.'" Enki reached down with hands that Ninshubur could not see, and from beneath his fingernails, from the dirt that had accumulated there over countless ages, he fashioned two creatures. They were small, no bigger than flies. They had no gender, no fixed form. They were neither alive nor dead, existing in that liminal space between all categories. He named them Kurgara and Galatur, the one who comforts and the one who consoles. "Go," he told them, "fly to the underworld, enter as spirits, for spirits are not bound by the laws that bind the living. Find Ereshkigal, do not argue with her, do not plead with her, simply mirror her pain back to her. Grieve with her, suffer with her, be with her in her loneliness, and when her heart softens, ask for Inanna's body. Sprinkle the food of life and the water of life upon it, and Inanna will revive." The two creatures bowed to Enki and rose into the air like sparks from a fire, like ash on the wind. They flew toward the east, toward the place where the earth opens into darkness, and they descended into the underworld.
The Kurgara and the Galatur passed through the 7 gates without challenge. They were too small, too insubstantial for the gatekeeper to notice. They were not trying to bring anything in or take anything out. They were simply traveling, as spirits travel, unbound by physical law. They passed through the gates and entered the throne room of the dead. Ereshkigal still sat upon her throne, unmoving. But something had changed. She was no longer still with the stillness of patience. She was still with the stillness of suffering. She sat with her hands pressed to her belly, her face twisted in pain. She was moaning, a low, terrible sound that came from deep within her body. The Kurgara and Galatur understood immediately. This was not physical pain, or not only physical pain. This was the pain of grief, of loss, of abandonment. This was the pain of being forgotten, of being left alone in darkness while others walked in light. Ereshkigal looked up as they approached, and her eyes were wild with anguish. "My belly," she moaned. "Oh, my belly!" And the Kurgara and Galatur responded not with offers of help or solutions, but with simple mirroring. "Oh, your belly," they said. "Your belly pains you." Ereshkigal's eyes widened slightly. Someone was listening. Someone was hearing her. "My heart," she cried. "Oh, my heart!" "Oh, your heart," they echoed. "Your heart is in anguish." "My liver," she wept. "Oh, my liver." "Oh, your liver," they said. "Your liver grieves." And so they continued. the goddess crying out her pain, and the two small spirits simply witnessing it, acknowledging it, reflecting it back to her without trying to fix it or minimize it or explain it away. This was what Ereshkigal had needed all along. Not solutions, not rescue, simply to be seen in her suffering, simply to have someone say, "Yes, you are in pain. Yes, it matters. Yes, I see you." Slowly, gradually, her cries grew quieter, her body relaxed. She looked at the Kurgara and Galatur with something that might have been gratitude, might have been relief. "You have eased my suffering," she said. "Ask of me what you will, and if it is in my power to grant, I will grant it." The Kurgara and Galatur spoke together. "Give us the corpse that hangs upon the wall," they said. Ereshkigal's face hardened. "That is my sister, she who came to my realm in pride and was brought low. She who thought she could simply walk through death and emerge unchanged. You would take her from me? We would restore her to life," they said, "with the food of life and the water of life that Enki has provided." Ereshkigal was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Take her," she said, "but know this. The laws of the Underworld must be satisfied. No one leaves the Underworld without leaving something behind. No one returns from death unchanged. If Inanna rises, someone must take her place." "We understand," the Kurgara and Galatur said. Ereshkigal gestured to her attendants. They lifted Inanna's corpse from the hook and laid it on the floor. The Kurgara and Galatur approached the body. It was gray and lifeless, the skin waxy, the eyes half open and unseeing. It looked like a discarded shell, like something that had once held meaning but now held none. The Kurgara sprinkled the food of life upon the lips, a substance like honey, like light, like the first taste of morning. The Galatur sprinkled the water of life upon the skin, a liquid like spring rain, like tears of joy, like the touch of a mother's hand on a fevered brow. And slowly, very slowly, color began to return to Inanna's flesh.
The first breath was the hardest. Inanna's chest convulsed, straining against the weight of death, fighting to pull air into lungs that had forgotten how to expand. Her body resisted, every cell insisting that it was dead, that it had crossed over into stillness and should remain there. But the food of life and the water of life were stronger than death. They were life itself, concentrated and distilled. They were every birth that had ever happened, every spring that had ever come after winter, every seed that had ever pushed up through cold earth toward light. Inanna's chest heaved. Air rushed in, harsh and burning, scraping her throat like sandpaper. She gasped, coughed, gasped again. Her eyes opened, but she could not see. Everything was darkness, or maybe she had simply forgotten what it meant to see. She blinked, and shapes began to resolve themselves out of the gray. The stone floor beneath her, the distant ceiling, the throne. Ereshkigal, watching her with an expression that held neither joy nor anger, simply observation. Inanna tried to speak, but her voice would not come. Her tongue felt thick and clumsy. Her throat ached with disuse. The Kurgara and Galatur helped her to sit up. Her body felt wrong, heavy, awkward, as if she had forgotten how to inhabit it. Her limbs moved stiffly. Her heart beat erratically, sometimes too fast, sometimes skipping beats altogether. She was alive, but she was not whole. Memory returned in fragments. The descent, the gates, the stripping, the judgment, the hook. She had died. She had actually died. She, Inanna, goddess and queen, had crossed the threshold from which none return. Except she had returned. She looked at Ereshkigal and for the first time truly saw her sister, not as shadow, not as absence, but as a being in her own right. A goddess who suffered alone, who carried grief that had no end, who sat in darkness not because she was evil or cruel, but because someone had to, because the dead needed a queen and she had accepted that burden without complaint. "Sister," Inanna whispered. Her voice was rough, barely audible. "Sister," Ereshkigal replied. "Thank you," Inanna said. Ereshkigal's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened just slightly. "You may go, but remember what I told you. The law of substitution must be honored. Someone must take your place. Someone must descend to fill the void you leave behind." Inanna nodded. She understood. Balance must be maintained. The Underworld could not simply lose one of its dead without receiving another in exchange. "I understand," she said. The Kurgara and Galatur helped her to stand. Her legs shook. She had to lean on them for support. Together, they began the journey back through the gates. As Inanna passed through each gate in reverse, the guardians returned her regalia to her. At the first gate, they gave her back the royal robe. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and the familiar weight of it should have been comforting, but instead it felt strange, as if the robe belonged to someone else, someone she used to be. At the second gate, they gave her back the measuring rod and line. She took them in her hand, but they felt alien, as if she had forgotten their purpose. At the third gate, the rings. She slipped them onto her fingers, but they sat loose, as if her fingers had shrunk. At the fourth gate, the breastplate. It covered her chest, but it no longer felt like protection. It felt like a lie. At the fifth gate, the necklace. It hung heavy around her throat, almost choking. At the sixth gate, the small lapis beads. They clicked together softly, a sound that had once pleased her, but now seemed meaningless. And at the seventh and final gate, the crown. Neti placed the shugura upon her head, and Inanna felt the weight of it press down on her skull, felt her neck bend slightly under the burden. She was restored. She was queen of heaven once more. She wore all the symbols of her power and authority. But she was not the same goddess who had descended. She could never be that goddess again. As she emerged from the underworld into the light of the world above, she was accompanied not just by the Kurgara and Galatur, but by a group of demons, the Gala, the underworld's bailiffs, whose job was to ensure that the law of substitution was honored. They were hideous creatures, twisted and grim, with no pity in their eyes. They followed Inanna like shadows, like a debt that must be paid. "Find someone to take your place," they hissed. "Find someone to descend. Until you do, we will not leave you." Inanna walked through the land, and the Gala followed her, and she began to search for someone who could take her place in the realm of death.
The first person Inanna encountered was Ninshubur, her faithful servant, still waiting at the temple gates, still dressed in mourning, her face haggard with grief and exhaustion. When she saw Inanna approaching, alive and walking, Ninshubur let out a cry of joy and ran forward, throwing herself at her queen's feet. "You have returned," she sobbed. "I thought you were lost forever. I mourned you. I petitioned the gods. Oh, my queen, you have returned." The Gala pressed close to Inanna, hissing in her ear. "This one," they said. "She is loyal. She is devoted. She would make a good substitute. Send her to the underworld in your place." Inanna looked down at Ninshubur, who was weeping with joy, who had torn her clothes and scratched her face in mourning, who had never wavered in her devotion, who had done everything Inanna had asked and more. "No," Inanna said quietly, "not this one." The Gala snarled in frustration, but they could not argue. The law was clear. Inanna had to choose. But she had to choose someone who deserved to descend, someone who had not mourned her absence, someone who had forgotten her while she dwelt in death. They moved on. Inanna went to the city of Bad-Dibira, where one of her sons lived. He was a minor god, a deity of shepherds and flocks. When he saw his mother approaching, he threw himself to the ground in mourning clothes, his face smeared with ashes. "Mother," he cried, "I thought you were lost. I have mourned you every day since you disappeared. I have made offerings. I have prayed. Oh, my queen, you have returned." The Gala hissed again. "This one, send him." But Inanna shook her head. "No, not this one." They moved on. Inanna visited each of her temples, each of her cities, and everywhere she went she found the same thing: mourning, grief, people who had torn their clothes and wept for her absence, who had felt the world grow cold and empty without her. She could not send any of them to the underworld. They had honored her absence. They deserved to remain in the light. But finally, she came to her own city of Uruk, to her own palace, to the place where she had lived before her descent. And there, sitting on her throne, dressed in her finest robes, eating from her plates and drinking from her cups, was Dumuzi, her consort, her lover, the shepherd god who had been her companion for uncounted years. He was laughing. He was surrounded by servants and musicians. He was clearly enjoying himself, presiding over a feast, acting as if he were king. He had not mourned her at all. When Dumuzi saw Inanna enter the hall, he stopped mid-laugh. The smile faded from his face. He stood up quickly, almost guiltily. "Inanna," he said, you've returned." She looked at him with eyes that had seen death, with eyes that had been sightless and gray, with eyes that no longer reflected light the way they once had. "I have returned," she said quietly. "I didn't think," Dumuzi faltered. "I mean, you were gone so long. We thought you weren't coming back." Inanna said nothing. She simply looked at him, at his fine clothes, at his full cup, at the remains of his feast spread across her table. "You did not mourn me," she said. I mourned in my own way," Dumuzi said. "I honored you by keeping your household running, by maintaining your palace, by ensuring that your servants were cared for." "You did not mourn me," Inanna repeated. Dumuzi's face went pale. He looked past Inanna and saw, for the first time, the demons that followed her, the Gala with their twisted faces and their hungry eyes. "Inanna, please," he whispered. She felt many things in that moment: anger, betrayal, hurt, but also something unexpected, a kind of detached understanding. Dumuzi had not mourned because he had not truly loved her, or perhaps because he had loved his comfort more than he had loved her. He had seen her absence as an opportunity rather than a loss. This, she understood, was his nature, and she had loved him anyway, or thought she had loved the idea of him, or simply enjoyed his company without ever really seeing who he was beneath the surface. The Gala did not wait for her command. They could see in her eyes that she had made her choice.
They fell upon Dumuzi like a pack of wolves. He screamed and tried to run, but they were faster. They dragged him from the throne, pulled him toward the door, toward the east, toward the place where the earth opens into darkness. "Inanna," he screamed, "please don't let them take me. I love you. I'll do anything." But Inanna turned away. The Gala dragged Dumuzi down into the underworld, down past the 7 gates, down to the throne room where Ereshkigal waited. They hung him on the hook where Inanna had hung, and he died as she had died, and the law of substitution was satisfied.
But Dumuzi had a sister. Her name was Geshtinanna, and she was a goddess of vines and wine, of poetry and dream interpretation. She loved her brother despite his faults, despite his selfishness, despite his weakness. When she heard that he had been taken to the underworld, she went to Inanna and begged for his life. "Please," she said, "he is foolish, I know. He is vain and thoughtless, but he is my brother, and I love him. Let me take his place. Let me go to the underworld instead of him." Inanna looked at Geshtinanna and saw genuine love, genuine sacrifice. She saw the willingness to give up everything for another, even when that other did not deserve it. She thought of Ninshubur, who had shown the same devotion. She thought of the Kurgara and Galatur, who had comforted Ereshkigal when no one else would. She thought of how much power there was in compassion, in the choice to ease another's suffering, even at cost to yourself. "I cannot release Dumuzi entirely," Inanna said. "The law has been satisfied, a substitute was found. But perhaps there is another way." She spoke with Ereshkigal, who listened in her throne room far below. Together they devised a compromise. Dumuzi would spend 6 months of each year in the underworld, hanging on the hook, dwelling in death and darkness, and for those 6 months Geshtinanna would walk free in the world above, tending to his flocks, caring for his people. Then, for the other 6 months, they would trade places. Geshtinanna would descend to the underworld, taking her brother's place on the hook, and Dumuzi would return to the world above, to the light and warmth and life. Neither would be free, neither would escape death entirely, but neither would be imprisoned forever. It was not perfect, it was not fair, but it was balance. It was the best compromise that could be made between the demands of life and the demands of death, between love and law, between mercy and justice. And so the pattern was set. Every year, when Dumuzi descended to the underworld, the world above grew cold, the plants withdrew into the earth, the days shortened, the world mourned his descent, even though he did not deserve such mourning. And every year, when he returned, the world rejoiced, the plants burst forth, the days lengthened, life returned, even though his return was purchased at the price of his sister's descent. The cycle continues to this day.
After Dumuzi was taken, after the compromise was made, after the Gala returned to the underworld satisfied, Inanna stood alone in her palace and looked at her own hands. They were the same hands, the same long fingers, the same smooth skin, the same rings glinting in the lamplight. But they felt different. They felt like hands that had touched death and been marked by it. She was Queen of Heaven once more. She wore her crown and her robes. She sat on her throne and received her worshippers. She blessed the crops and the flocks. She inspired desire and love. She rode to battle and conquered her enemies. From the outside, she appeared unchanged. But inside, in the secret chambers of her heart, in the places she did not show to anyone, she was transformed. She had learned what powerlessness felt like. She had learned what it meant to be stripped of everything that gave her identity, everything that made her special, everything that separated her from the common run of mortals and lesser gods. She had learned that beneath the crown and the beauty and the power, she was simply a being, vulnerable, mortal in her own way, capable of suffering and death. This knowledge did not make her weak. If anything, it made her stronger, because now her power was tempered with understanding. She could no longer wield her authority carelessly, because she knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of absolute power, to stand naked before judgment with no defense and no appeal. She had learned compassion, though she would never call it that. She had learned to see suffering in others because she had suffered herself. She had learned that darkness exists not to be conquered or illuminated away, but to be acknowledged, to be witnessed, to be given its due. She had learned that her sister, Ereshkigal, was not her opposite, but her complement, that death was not the enemy of life, but its necessary counterpart, that the underworld was not a place of punishment, but a place of truth, where all the illusions and pretenses of the upper world fell away and only what was essential remained. She visited Ereshkigal sometimes now, descending to the underworld not as a conquering hero or a prideful goddess, but as a sister. They did not speak much. Ereshkigal was not given to conversation, but they sat together in the silence, in the darkness, and their presence was enough. Inanna no longer feared death because she had died and returned. She no longer feared loss because she had lost everything and discovered that she still existed without it. She no longer feared darkness because she had dwelt in the deepest darkness and found that it was not empty, but full of truth, full of stillness, full of the patient waiting that precedes all transformation. She was not a better goddess. She was not kinder or gentler or more merciful, but she was whole in a way she had never been before. She contained within herself both light and dark, both life and death, both the heights of joy and the depths of grief. And this wholeness, hard won and dearly purchased, was worth more than all the power she had possessed before her descent.
The 7 gates remain. They stand in the underworld, eternal and unchanging, waiting for any who choose to descend. Each gate represents a stripping away, a loss, a surrender. The crown, authority, the right to rule, the power to command. At this gate, you learn that you are not special, not chosen, not entitled to anything simply by virtue of who you are or what position you hold. The jewels, beauty, adornment, the power to be desired. At this gate, you learn that your worth does not lie in your appearance, in how others perceive you, in whether you are admired or wanted. The necklace, desire itself, both the desire you inspire and the desire you feel. At this gate, you learn to exist without needing anything outside yourself, to be complete in the absence of longing. The breastplate, courage, protection, invulnerability. At this gate, you learn that you can be wounded, that your heart is soft and breakable, that you are not as strong as you thought you were. The rings, agency, the power to act, to influence, to make things happen. At this gate, you learn what it means to be acted upon, to be powerless, to have no control over your circumstances. The measuring rod, judgment, the ability to determine right from wrong, truth from falsehood.
At this gate, you learn that your sense of what is just may not be as clear as you thought, that moral certainty is a luxury afforded only to those who have never truly suffered. The robe, identity itself, the answer to the question, "Who am I?" At this gate, you learn that you are not your name, your role, your reputation, your achievements. You are something deeper and simpler and more difficult to define. These gates are not punishments, they are teachings. What is stripped away at the gates must be reclaimed on the way back up, but it cannot be reclaimed in the same way. You cannot put the crown back on and pretend that you have not learned what it means to be without authority. You cannot wear the jewels and forget that you have existed without beauty. Everything you reclaim, you must reclaim consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of both its power and its cost. This is the gift of descent. This is why the journey is necessary.
Winter comes every year. The days shorten, the light fails, the green things withdraw into the earth, pulling their life force down into roots and darkness, waiting for a spring that feels in the depths of December like it may never come. This is the season of descent. This is when the world remembers Inanna's journey, when the story is told again, when we acknowledge that there are times when we must go down into darkness, whether we want to or not. Sometimes descent is chosen. Sometimes it is forced upon us by circumstance, by loss, by illness, by grief, by the 100 small deaths that happen in the course of a life. Sometimes we descend because we are curious, because we seek wholeness, because we sense that there is something in the darkness that we need to know. Sometimes we descend because we have no choice, because the gates appear before us unbidden, and we must pass through them or turn back from life itself. But however we descend, the pattern is the same. We are stripped. We are judged. We die in one way or another, perhaps not physically, but in all the ways that matter. We lose ourselves. We become nothing. And then, if we are fortunate, if someone above remembers us and petitions on our behalf, if we are given the food of life and the water of life, we return. But we do not return unchanged. We return carrying the knowledge of death in our bones. We return with the mark of darkness on our souls. We return whole in a way we were not whole before, but we also return wounded in ways that never fully heal. This is the truth of the descent. It is necessary, it is terrible, it is transformative. And it is not something to be feared, ultimately, because it is simply what happens. It is part of the cycle. It is woven into the structure of existence as deeply as the turning of the seasons, as inevitably as the sun setting at the end of each day. Inanna descended, Inanna died, Inanna returned. And the world, which had grown cold and still in her absence, came back to life when she emerged from the gates, not because she was the same goddess, but because she was a goddess who had touched death and been marked by it, who carried within herself both light and darkness, who could bless the living because she had dwelt among the dead. The story ends, but it also continues. Every winter is a descent. Every spring is a return. Every loss is a death. Every recovery is a resurrection. The gates remain. The underworld remains. Ereshkigal sits on her throne in the darkness, patient and eternal, waiting for those who will come to her realm, waiting to strip them of their illusions and their pride and their power. And Inanna walks in the world above, crowned and beautiful and terrible, carrying within herself the memory of the hook, the memory of stillness, the memory of what it means to be nothing. Both goddesses are necessary, both realms are real, both journeys, the descent and the return, are part of becoming whole. So when winter comes, when the days grow short and the light fails, and you feel yourself being drawn down into darkness, remember Inanna. Remember that descent is not failure, stripping away is not loss, death is not the end. Remember that the gates will open for you as they opened for her, that you will pass through them naked and afraid, that you will be judged and found wanting, that you will die in all the ways that matter. And remember too that you will return, changed, marked, carrying the darkness with you, but also carrying the strength that comes from having survived it. You will put your crown back on, but you will wear it differently. You will reclaim your power, but you will wield it with humility. You will return to the light, but you will never again forget the darkness, never again pretend that it doesn't exist, never again dismiss those who dwell in it. This is the gift of descent. This is the wisdom of winter. This is the story of Inanna, who went down into death and returned to life, who was broken and made whole, who learned that sometimes you must lose everything to discover who you truly are beneath all the crowns and jewels and robes. May you have the courage to descend when your time comes. May you have the strength to endure the stripping. May you have the patience to wait in darkness. And may you, when the water of life touches your lips, breathe again, rise again, return to the world you thought you had lost. The story is finished. The silence returns. The darkness waits, patient as always. And somewhere in a land between two rivers, the seasons turn, and winter gives way to spring, and the cycle continues, eternal and unbroken. Rest now. The story has been told. Sleep and dream of gates opening, of darkness that teaches, of death that transforms. Sleep and remember Inanna. Sleep and know that descent is holy. Sleep